This podcast brought to you by Ring. Save big right now on select Ring doorbells and cams and give the gifts that keep on giving. Find gifts that help handle all those deliveries.
Hey, again? Leave it behind the chair with the others.
And gifts that tell you when creatures are stirring.
Biscuit, get away from the ornaments. Good girl.
Shop the holiday sale for deals on select devices at Ring.com. Find unexpected gifts for less right now at Ring.com.
When you get a Volvo, you get more than a car. You get My Volvo Experience. From Volvo certified technicians that are always there for you and whose priority is your safety, to safety innovation that helps you protect what's important. Volvos are designed for less worrying and more living, because there's nothing more important than helping keep you safe on the road. Visit myvolvoexperience.com for further details and T's and C's.
I need your clothes, your boots, and your motorcycle.
Hello and welcome to Unequal Sequel. My name is Dave and I'm one of the two hosts of this whiz pop fantastic podcast.
And I'm Rich, and I'm the second host of this whiz pop fantastic podcast. That's a mouthful, isn't it? Think of me as Al Pacino to Dave's Robert De Niro, just because we're both legends. Hooah!
Hooah. The premise of Unequal Sequel is very simple. We ask our guests for their best ever sequel, worst ever sequel, and finally their dream sequel.
And of course, we've got to often drift off and just have some chats about movies in general.
We also have to point out that we do spoil movies because we talk about them in quite in-depth detail.
Yeah.
On today's episode, we are joined by Ian Nathan.
Ian Nathan is a brilliant film writer. He has written some fantastic books all about movies and the people that make them. He is a previous editor-in-chief of Empire magazine and a general film encyclopedia of a person.
We're very excited to sit down with Ian and chat all things sequels with him.
These are Ian Nathan's Unequal Sequels. Enjoy!
What is your earliest memory of getting excited about a sequel?
Oh, so that is a very good question. I think I would probably say a Bond film, although, again, arguments about sequels and whether they're sequels or not, notwithstanding. I think my first perception of sequels coming along was watching Bond films probably in the late 1970s, and James Bond Will Return being at the end of the credits. And if you go back, I think, to something like Moonraker, the Roger Moore era, they named the next film. It wasn't just James Bond Will Return, it was James Bond Will Return in For Your Eyes Only. So that kind of added to it. So we already knew there was obviously a script being written and production cycle was underway. So I think my first proper memory of anticipation in that respect, maybe Bond. The other one, of course, is Star Wars. And I'm exactly that era that I saw Star Wars. But I didn't know about Empire Strikes Back until much later in the cycle. So I must have heard about it 1980. It came out in 1981.
Yeah.
Because, this is pre-internet, pre-anything. There were very few
glory
film
days.
magazines. The glory days where we didn't know about things. So you heard it on the playground, rumour mill. And that I remember very clearly. And I remember very clearly a kid who always seemed to be in the know. You always one kid in your playground who was in the know, whose dad worked in the movie business maybe somehow. And he was telling me that Han Solo was going to die in the second Star Wars film. Now, at the age of 7 or 8, that's quite distressing news. And I wouldn't believe him, but it stuck with me. And of course, in history, it tells us that Harrison Ford constantly wanted George Lucas to kill him off in those films. So maybe this kid's dad did know something that we didn't. But thankfully, at least he lived through the first Star Wars films.
We get quite often stories like getting access to trailers is so easy now. But back in the early days, you had to actually go see a film to watch the trailers.
Yeah.
Is that something you did for Empire Strikes Back? Did you get whisper of a trailer being shown? Or
Gosh, it's a long time ago. No, I don't particularly remember trailers as such. I obviously did see them. but I don't remember it being an Empire Strikes Back trailer. I remember my dad seemed to know more than I did, and he said Empire Strikes Back is coming out, this next weekend. Let's go and see it. Of course, that was a huge treat at the time.
I can't imagine being in a cinema watching Empire Strikes Back for the first time.
Because it's so innocent, and it's very hard to project backwards. But at that time, there wasn't hype, there wasn't the rumor mill. Such a thing as a spoiler didn't even compute.
Yeah.
So we had no conception of the secrets that would be unveiled. You went into cinema just for the experience of it. I wanted more of that Star Warsy stuff. That's what you wanted. You didn't sort of try and prejudge it. I mean, you're 7 years old, I suppose, but you didn't sort of go in thinking, where are the characters going to go? What will happen? What kind of film do I want? You have such open-mindedness at that age. You just want that excitement of being in the cinema with that film. And I don't even remember being shocked by the Darth Vader revelation. You think that would just blow your mind at the time. But
yeah,
I think I was just more interested in lightsabers.
Lightsabers are cool. So the feeling when you came out of it, do you remember that? Was there rumours for a third one at that point? Did you know Return of the Jedi was coming, or was it?
I think because of the nature of the end of that film, and Star Wars is almost a complete film. You could stop it there, and the job was done. The enemy was defeated, and the good guys had won. But the second film obviously ends on a hanging note. I mean, literally, Han Solo is trapped and gone, and his circumstance, it was quite weird for kids. It's like, what the hell's going on here? So it almost seemed at that point you needed a sequel because the story felt incomplete, which is a very unusual experience to come out of a film with. Because the idea of series of films, every Bond film was a unit unto itself. It ended with the bad guys defeated, so that was fine. And you knew it would come back again and do the same again. But with Empire Strikes Back, I think it was the first time I'd ever experienced sort of doubt and uncertainty, coming out of a film.
Yeah.
So that was highly unusual, and that sort of created in your head a necessity. And I think at that point, I'm getting older, and the world is starting to sort of generate film magazines and coverage. And I think things like the evening news started to cover things like Star Wars. So you got into television reports on Return of the Jedi is underway, shooting in under great secrecy, but not so under great secrecy in the desert. So I do remember that anticipation of a third part very clearly, much more than any kind of second part.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. I love talking to Star Wars about people. It's great.
It's all right. It's strange. Yeah. Again, it's sort of an age thing, I suppose. But I saw Star Wars innocently, in the sense that I knew nothing about it. The first time I was very small and got taken to see it. So you can't imagine a world where Star Wars didn't exist beforehand, and it was just something introduced to us. And that's what it was. It was, and now, of course, it occupies such a large chunk of culture that it's impossible to believe in a world without Star Wars.
I think I'm from a generation that saw Return of the Jedi first. I'm a little
right.
So that's why I think Return of the Jedi is still my favourite Star Wars. But by that point, I kind of knew the spoils, what had come before. But
yeah.
We grew up in a world where Star Wars existed already, Dave, didn't we?
Yeah,
Star Wars is older than we are. I mean, I was alive when Empire came out, but my parents certainly weren't taking me to the cinema at that point. I was under a year old.
Right.
So I think I think Jedi is the first one I remember, but Empire is definitely my favourite.
It's kind of interesting that there's a point, if you're a big movie fan, where you start looking at newspaper adverts, and there's a kind of point where you move on from your parents decide to take you to something, and that's the ritual, to you choose to go and see something and demand to see it. There's a kind of shift around about sort of 8, 9 years old, maybe 10 years old. And that mine starts to come in with Raiders of the Lost Ark. That I remember very clearly the Raiders of the Lost Ark poster in the local newspaper, and just pointing at it to my parents, almost like gesturing, this is what we are going to do today. Whatever plans you have, whatever you thought was happening, it isn't, because this thing, and it was just the advert. Again, I obviously recognized Harrison Ford and just the nature of the ad of Raiders Lost Ark communicates a lot to you. As a kid. Like, this looks exciting. I need to see this. Otherwise, I'm going to burst. And there's going to be all sorts of trouble at home. And they did, thankfully, take me. They understood where my head was at. And if I got into that mood, they had to take me along. And this kind of carried on. This is what invented my whole career. The next one, funny, you go along and you hit Blade Runner. And I'm about 12. And I demanded to see that. My mum had to take me, and that perplexed me. That was different. I came out thinking, well, I don't quite understand that, and felt kind of strange after that one in a way I hadn't felt before. But there was a kind of chain reaction.
What is your best sequel?
Best sequel. Again, you asked me this beforehand. Have one ready in mind, and I actually thought quite hard about this because it's a really hard question. But I find best anything's difficult. People go, you meet people at parties and tell them what you do, and they kind of immediately go, oh, what's your favorite film? So that's a natural response. And I don't have one. I have hundreds of favorite films because it's a huge world. It's like albums and books. You don't really have one. You have all the things that make you who you are. And that, sequels that really applied. But I knew you needed one. And so it was no good me sitting here going, and we'll be here all day.
You can have some honourable mentions though, if you like. You can certainly put those in.
But obviously, I started to apply the rules that people apply. If it's a one story divided up, as in The Godfather, as in The Lord of the Rings, I thought no, that they aren't technically sequels. I kind of started thinking of what is a sequel, and I kind of honed in on James Cameron, who kind of talked about this idea of a sequel is almost a starting again. You take what a film did and you start again and redo it, but differently. Same but different, and you apply. You take what all the fans want, but you tell a new story. But there was that kind of starting again thing is important. Sequels don't depend on the first film, ending and offering up the game, as it were. So the ball isn't necessarily thrown forward. So Empire Strikes Back in a way is more of a sequel than Return of the Jedi is, because Star Wars finishes. They had no idea they were going to make another one. So Empire Strikes Back came along, and then everyone, Lucas started claiming, I've written all these stories, and it's one great saga. And so at that point, I would say Empire Strikes Back is a sequel, but Return of the Jedi isn't a sequel because it's the same story as part two. Whereas I think Empire Strikes Back is a different story in the same universe of part one. Same characters. I know you can sort of stitch in this overarching saga of a family, and once you get into the prequels and all that, and it all gets very murky. It's all about Darth Vader and I don't know what else. But at the pure point at which those films were made, one is a sequel and one isn't. So along those principles, I thought Aliens, because Aliens is very much a sequel. And Alien existed and ended, and six years went past, or 7 years went past without. It's 79, 86, isn't it? Aliens. So in terms of probably putting it together, maybe 5 or 6 years they started to develop it, but there was no prospect of a sequel at all. They'd moved on, and that was a time when sequels weren't really done in Hollywood, especially sci-fi sequels. Star Wars was the exception. You had Alien and you moved on to different things. Very different Hollywood to now. So I thought Aliens. Then I thought that's too obvious. You probably had about 80 people on your podcast who've done Aliens.
Nope.
Because not one. I thought everyone would do Aliens because it's sort of meant to be the high watermark of what sequels can do. It took a masterpiece and it did its own thing with it and created an equal masterpiece. Very different films, same universe, in touch with each other, but perfect relationship in terms of sequel.
We do often use Aliens as the example of how to make a great sequel.
Yeah.
Because it takes the concept and then makes it different, almost a different genre, essentially, for Aliens than to Alien.
Yeah, absolutely. Haunted house story to action movie.
Yeah.
The switch. And the switch in, what's really interesting, I think it's the switch in tones of a director. In some ways, all you needed for Aliens to be a sequel is just for James Cameron to take hold of it. Because if Ridley Scott had done it, and he did want to do it back in 1980, 1981, he did propose to Fox he'd do another one. And Fox were like, what are sequels? Why do we do this? And it all got confused. That would have been slightly different. That would be more of a saga, I think. And I think that because Cameron came along and he loved Alien. It's one of the films that inspired him. Excuse me. Because he's a very ethos and his very way of going about making films, and his arrogance, his wonderful arrogance, that He said, well, you really made a fantastic film, but it's just my prequel. I'm making the film that counts. And that's what makes James Cameron James Cameron. That was the point when it became the perfect sequel, because he applied his aesthetic to it and his way of thinking and his way of storytelling. And he did, because he's a very smart guy. You know, he looked at Alien and said, what makes this work? There are kind of really just three things: the alien, that creature, because of obvious reasons; Ripley, because it's Ripley's story, and he understood that, and he understands every film needs a human heart; and it's the aesthetic. It's the clammy future space noir aesthetic, which he kind of knew he couldn't do as well as Scott, because Scott has this fabulous eye. So he said, well, I'm just going to do this and run. And obviously he wrote his Vietnam in Space and the Marines and all that we know about. He made a fantastic movie that holds up to this day. But anyway, I thought that was too obvious a choice. I thought you guys would, oh God, not aliens again. We'll talk about aliens. So I went instead, and I do kind of think this is true, and it's making a bit of reaction out of people listening. But I think Terminator 2 Judgment Day is maybe a better sequel than Aliens. I'm not saying it's necessarily a better film, and I don't want to make the choice between them anyway, because I'm greedy and I get to have them both. But I think Terminator 2 is more extraordinary in terms of being a sequel, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. I think if you ask most people what the best ever sequel is, people will say Terminator 2, Aliens, Godfather Part 2. You know, that they'll be the list that people come out with. Strangely enough, you're the first person to pick Terminator 2 as well.
No, he's the second. He's the second.
Yeah.
Oh, you're the second. Sorry,
Cameron
through
from Unilad picked
of
Terminator
course,
2.
yeah, Cameron picked. Yeah,
but it's such a personal choice. So why is Terminator 2 your personal choice for being best sequel?
Well, one of the reasons was the ingenuity. Yeah. I think what sets Cameron's filmmaking apart is he moves into genres that are very obvious, but he's ingenious with kind of archetypes and basic storytelling modes. So he gives us the kind of, if you want to be a bit arty-farty about it, he gives you the kind of collective conscious Jungian thing that we all buy into, subconsciously or not. He hones in on things we understand, on a kind of primal level. Mothers and daughters, married couples, peril, absolute peril, the most survival element. All his films, I think, fundamentally about survival. You watch the original Terminator, and it's just about primal survival. It's an extraordinary, most poetic rendition of the chase. How do you keep going? Now, I watched Halloween Kills yesterday, and I kept thinking back to Halloween, as you do. What a brilliant primal movie Halloween is. Of course, Halloween is the Terminator. They are the same. They're versions of one another. It's, the possible killer, the woman in peril, but who has the wherewithal to survive. So they really kind of tune into something that's absolutely kind of wired into us as our beings. Fight or flight, all those kind of things. And Cameron has an instinct for that. That's why his films make billions and billions of dollars. He takes these ridiculous ideas, planets, boats, all these things, and he just hones in on things we all get. No matter where you live, no matter who you are, you get survival. You just understand it. And he's so good at it. He's a virtuoso then on playing on those things. That's what's brilliant about Aliens. And with Terminator 2, I thought the genius is, and the kind of, for him, the kind of quandary he faced, I think he resisted making a sequel. There were various rights issues as well, but he resisted making a sequel because he was redoing himself. And James Cameron's biggest rival is James Cameron. How do you outdo yourself? It's a really tricky thing. I mean, Ridley Scott's encountered this problem in his Return to the Alien universe. It's very hard to outdo yourself when you've made a film as good as The Terminator or Alien. And Cameron sort of sat down. Again, he's a fantastic. I've been writing about him recently, so he's been in my head quite a lot. And one of the fascinating things about him, he's sort of half storyteller and half engineer, physicist, scientist kind of guy. So he comes at sort of things very logically. So when he sat down to write Terminator 2, he said, well, the logical thing to do is do more of the same. That's the sequel rule. I'll just bring back Arnie because he was now essential to the mix. He hadn't been for the first film, but he was now because it's been a huge hit. And he said, we can just go on another killing spree and there'll be a different set of humans. But he kind of sat down and he went through ideas he had. with his great friend William Wisher, who's a kind of childhood friend, who helped him write the first one. They kind of went through a list together. And they went through all the things that were in terrible sequels to come. They thought about the future wars. They thought about a female Terminator. And they kind of dismissed all these things. Too gimmicky, too expensive, kind of not the point. And Cameron realized there were certain things you had to do. You had to bring Arnie back. You had to be in present day LA. LA was part of the story. It's something I think every sequel, maybe with the exception of Terminator 3, has completely forgotten. Every further Terminator sequel, they are LA stories. They are contemporary LA stories. That's Cameron's science fiction. He doesn't do, apart from Avatar, far-flung science fiction. His best science fiction has kind of got an immediacy about it. Even Aliens feels like Vietnam in space. It feels very immediate and very contemporary in its own strange way. So they knew it had to be LA, and he knew, and because this is Cameron, it had to be exponentially better. So that meant the threat had to be bigger, the scale had to be bigger. You had to move the filmmaking itself on. This is what you had to do in sequels. But what makes him brilliant as a filmmaker, the ingenuity I mentioned, was he thought, I can't do Terminator again. I'm unwilling to. He said, what really makes a sequel work? And I wonder, and I'm sure people can argue, but I wonder if he's really the first person to truly fathom the algorithm out of what makes a sequel great rather than just formulaic, is you had to have that other element of ingenuity. You have to change the story. You have to kind of do the same thing again, but different. And that's very hard, because stories are, fit kind of routines, especially if you've already developed the routine. So he kind of thought about, the moral problem of the Terminator. And he'd been troubled by it. There had been this reaction to Arnie where everybody cheered him in cinemas in the original film. I'll be back, and crashing into the police station, then walking around with his Uzis and everything, killing cops, left, right, and center. People had cheered it on. And he'd become ironically, this kind of cult figure. The great thing about the Terminator is that everybody's a hero. You love Reese and Sarah Connor in the kind of the simple way, but you love Arnie as the T-800 as well, because he's just great and cool. And he does all the things you want to do. He doesn't obey any kind of civic responsibility or any kind of social constraints. He just bashes down the door and does things because he's a machine. It's just a fabulous idea. But it's troubled Cameron because there was kind of a moral problem within it. And all his films are kind of strangely quite moral. And maybe apart from the original Terminator, he goes, I can't do that. I've got to explore that. And through thinking about that, he came up with this ludicrous proposition, ridiculous. He said to William Wisher, late one night, what happens if we try and make people cry for a Terminator? If I can make people cry for a machine, then cinema itself will have done something nothing else has done before. Yeah. And actually, I think within that, it says James Cameron thinking, I've done something no one else has ever done before. That
and he definitely did do that, because I cry like a baby.
Exactly. You're crying for a washing machine. That's what you're doing. And that's, as soon as he started thinking that, then the whole game changes. Then he starts to kind of conceive and logically construct a story. And there's famously, there was the original idea, or his first idea was, and have a bad Arnie and a good Arnie wandering around LA, kind of shooting up and killing things. And he was going to bring Sarah Connor back because, she was like Ripley. She was kind of the defining human element. And he knew there was a time, I think, when he thought about playing around the time-space continuum and bringing Reese back. But then he thought that was too Back to the Future, and he didn't want to do that.
I'm glad he didn't do that.
Yeah, he kind of thought about it and then rejected that proposition. So he had the kind of tendency he needed to bang back. And he had this two Arnies thing, but then he just thought, I think he wondered whether it's a bit gimmicky. And he knew he would have to break one of the Schwarzeneggers, because otherwise we won't be able to tell them apart. And then he had to have Arnie in the makeup chair every day and all sorts of kind of. And then they came up with the idea of the T-1000, which was kind of an idea that had been lurking since the first film, liquid metal, and all the kind of physicists in Cameron's brain started to operate, because he knew he needed a bad guy that was exponentially worse and was bad enough to make Arnie an underdog. And that decision is really interesting. Not only is he going to make us cry for a Terminator, he was going to make Arnold Schwarzenegger an underdog, which basically undermined the entire brand of Arnold Schwarzenegger he had helped assemble with the Terminator. You think of all the films in between, there'd been Commando and Raw Deal and Predator, this huge multi-million-dollar industry based on the fact that Arnie was indomitable. And that was the brand value of Schwarzenegger. And Cameron says, I'm going to prise that open. I'm going to shatter it. And I'm going to make him the underdog. I'm going to make you worry for Arnold Schwarzenegger. So, it's a brilliant conception. It's Alice in Wonderland. It's through the looking glass for a sequel. So it's not just do the same again. It's invert it.
And did it so well as well. Like, it's just, the T-1000 is such a sinister, different kind of baddie. A different sense of a big bad than Schwarzenegger's Terminator. Schwarzenegger's Terminator, you felt like would come in and shoot everyone and blow the place up. You thought that the T-1000 would cunningly slip under the door and murder you in your sleep, kind of thing. It's a different kind of...
It's great casting as well. Robert Patrick is so good in that role. Yeah. He's just unbelievably scary.
He is incredibly good.
I think they found him because he looked ordinary. And it's interesting, again, the original idea with the Terminator was that he'd be like an infiltration unit. I mean, logically, if you were going to send back a killing machine, you'd have one that blends in with the crowds, who doesn't stand out. You can just move in and out secretly, like a spy. That's sort of an assassin type character. And it was going to be Lance Henriksen, when he first started putting it together. And of course, Lance Henriksen wasn't well known enough. He had Schwarzenegger. That all changed. And it kind of shifted the whole Terminator thing into something more ironic and funny and much more of a black comedy. But I think Robert Patrick was a return to that idea of the infiltration unit, that he was a cop. In fact, it's Stan Winston who said to Schwarzenegger, okay, we've got this liquid metal Terminator, this kind of creation that can take on any shape as long as it's the same scale as him. But he said, there's no human face to it. And the audience need a villain to look at. And it was Cameron, being the anti-authoritarian that he is, when I know, let's make him a cop. Which is let's just everybody had their kind of suspicions about the cops even back then, that they were kind of thought of poorly. And the Rodney King element is around here, I think. It came slightly after, but he was projecting this kind of social message onto the film as well, subtly, by having Robert Patrick as a cop, supposedly the trustworthy guy, can walk into a home. And of course, anything but. He's another machine who's got a job to do effortlessly, turning in and out of liquid metal.
Do you remember when you first saw it, what your initial reactions were?
I do. Well, differently to what we were talking about earlier, there was huge amounts of hype around Terminator 2. I mean, my first conception, goes back right to the beginning of my time as a film journalist. And I'd been a student journalist, and I'd got myself, by the gift of the gab, into what they call multimedias, which are very big press screenings, that you may have heard of them, of the biggest films. You guys have been along. So I got talked myself into the Total Recall press screenings. It was that summer.
That's a good screening.
Good screening. I think 1990 or whenever it was. And they played the teaser trailer beforehand. You remember the Stan Winston teaser trailer, which was made before any of the main film was shot, and was directed by Stan Winston. And I think there may have been rumors, there may have been stuff circulating, but again, no internet. So we didn't really know. And they just played that. And this is a room full of journalists and press and media types, cynics. And boom, 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 there was Arnie put into comes out of the machine, the steam and the sparks, and I'll be back. People started cheering. And that really was, and it was it was a braggadocio. It was showing off, but brilliant marketing. Year ahead of the film. They hadn't even begun to shoot yet, so there's so many things they had still to do. But Cameron let it be known that I'm coming, and it'll be back. And it was a really cunning narrative device if you think about it. It's just he's come a production line, so this means any number of sequels can come, because you just have to remake an Arnie and then send him back in time on some level.
It's a really great principle that your leading man can essentially die in every series, in every film, and then still come back for the next one. I think it's a marketer's dream, isn't it?
It's fantastic, and it's interesting because also it kind of breaks a rule if you think about it. Arnie is playing a different character in T2 than he is in T1. He's been programmed differently. This is obviously what we understand. This is the emotional element to it. He's a good Terminator. but it's kind of a really cunning redeployment of the kind of core, the core value of the Terminator was the ironic killing machine who didn't care.
Yeah.
Now turned into this kind of touchy-feely Terminator. And Schwarzenegger was really, I think, bemused by Cameron's proposition at first. I think he panicked a bit. Cameron started talking to him about it. He didn't get it, Schwarzenegger. But I'm the Terminator, and I think he worried for what he had established. He was the biggest star in the world, arguably the most famous person in the world at that point in time, based on what the Terminator had done for him. And Cameron was threatening to shatter it, and especially with the core one, with the Terminator. And Cameron's just like, trust me. And I think Cameron also appealed to him as an actor. He said, can you imagine playing this, performing? And actually, I think really it may be his best performance, Schwarzenegger. He's superb in that film.
Yeah,
his timing and his carrying on with the kind of the established idea of the Terminator being a machine, but adjusting that subtly to this idea that his neural net processor or whatever it is can learn. It's been switched on, and the kid can teach him.
It seems to give Schwarzenegger more confidence, this role as well, because his movies afterwards weren't just straightforward action movies. They had a bit more heart and a bit more acting potentially in them, I think. And so we've got James Cameron to thank for Twins. Cheers for that.
Yeah, I was going to say Jingle All the Way.
Jingle All the Way.
Junior, all those wonderful films.
God. But he's so iconic in this. When you think of Terminator now, you probably do think Terminator 2 Terminator. And
yes.
The scenes, some of the scenes are so iconic. Which ones stand out for you? Is it the action scenes or the moments between the boy and the robot?
I still love the opening. I think is superb. I think the opening is not just great filmmaking in the way he sort of establishes or re-establishes the character. Doing exactly the same as he did in the first film. He arrives in the crackle of lightning. He's stark naked. He walks into that truck dive full of sort of Hell's Angels. Brilliant idea alone. Hell's Angels, that's great. It's a truck stop on the edge of LA, and he's naked, and so it's a comedy sequence. And what Cameron is subtly doing is he's sort of recalibrating our perception of the character. He's setting up Arnie for the movie for us. So if you think back to the Terminator, he arrives in Griffith Park, and there's Bill Paxton as a punk with his gang, and Arnie comes up and sort of basically kills them all, and it's kind of ruthless and slasher movie like. Here, the same kind of thing is going on. Instead of punks, they're Hell's Angels. So he's replaying the scene. He's doing what sequels do. In fact, you do structure the film in a similar way, hit similar beats, but they're completely different, completely inverted. And as soon as you see him and walk into the bar, you kind of know that he's different and he's funnier, and you're kind of rooting for him in a different way. You kind of want him to kill the bad guys, but as he walks out dressed in leathers and he puts the shades on and gets onto the Harley, you think this is kind of like superhero stuff. This is kind of an icon re-established. But we knew without being told that he was a hero. I don't know it's how Cameron sort of plays the scene. And of course, then you see that the liquid metal guy arrive at the same time. So we get the counterpoint and we understand. And then you get the kid. It's just an extraordinary opening. But again, it's just scenes, isn't it? Again, I watched it relatively recently. The kind of the storm drain chase. It's just it's just metal being hurled around. There's a point where the T-1000 crashes it's like a tow truck into the ground. And they do it in slow-mo, extreme slow-mo. So you see the stress wave go through the metal. And that's kind of a metaphor for the whole film. The whole film's a stress wave he's going to put you through.
I feel like Michael Bay saw that scene with the stress wave and then just made a Transformers franchise out of that one shot.
I have no idea why that was good, why you had to, And in some ways, what it is a bit sad as well, because Cameron is starting to leave those things behind. The film is sort of impregnated with his own change because of the CGI use for the T-1000, that all these fantastic things, in reality, he's going to start doing on computers and gradually move away. I know we go through Titanic and all that element, but there are the seeds of doom. The machines are going to take over his career, and that's kind of there as well. I love what probably my favorite action sequence in the film is the chase, the highway chase towards the end. So they go from blowing up Cyberdyne with the T-1000 on their tail towards the big factory at the end. And they'd shut down like 2.5 miles of freeway in LA. Only Cameron would do that. They had kind of lighting rigs on towers. From a distance, it must have looked like Close Encounters or something. Aliens were landing over there. And of course, it was done over weeks. They drove these trucks down, the SWAT van, and all those fantastic things. But they got that thing where the helicopter comes down, literally is almost on the same level as the vehicles is behind them. And there's a freeway bridge, which is a Pacific Coast Highway, goes over the freeway they were on. So it's 4 lanes of traffic, this freeway bridge. And I know the story that the plan was that the trucks go under and the helicopter goes up and over and down again and follows on. And the guy, the helicopter pilot, was a bit like James Cameron. He was gung-ho. He was kind of like, and he went to Cameron, I think on the night they were due to do it, and said, I'll fly it under the bridge. I'll fly a chopper under the underpass. And Cameron, it's never been done. No. It's incredibly risky if you think about it. The blades are about 8 feet from the concrete above.
Yeah.
You can't go down because the ground is down. So the clearance issues are, beyond the rules with aviation. I'm not sure were obeyed. I mean, maybe they were, maybe they weren't. Cameron, of course, is like, absolutely, let's do this. And they had to damp down all the dust on the road because it would blow up into eddies and affect the rotor blades. So they had to kind of damp it all down. And they did 1 practice and then 2 run-throughs for the actual shooting. And guess who's shooting it handheld within 10 feet of the chopper? James Cameron. He's in the camera truck, getting as close to that chopper as he can. But it's just the thing I miss about James Cameron, however you think about Avatar and whatever you think the sequel's going to bring, he doesn't fly choppers under bridges anymore.
No.
And
no one does.
Yeah.
It's such a CGI thing now. I think the producers must have told the producers just have a walk that day. Just leave the set. You don't want to see what's about to happen. They must have had a nightmare. Just thinking about it gives me cold sweats. But it is also my favourite scene in that movie. It's just thinking about it. It's an incredible scene. Oh, man. I love that film. I love Terminator 2. I think it's possibly today it's going to be my favourite sequel. Tomorrow it's probably going to be something different.
It's very hard.
Sergeant and Mrs. Smith, you are going to love this house.
Is that a tub in the kitchen? There's no field manual for finding the right home. But when you do, USAA Homeowners Insurance can help protect it the right way. Restrictions apply.
This episode is brought to you by Tidy Care from Tidy Cats, a new line of cat-first litter solutions, like Tidy Care Comfort, made with smaller granules for a cat-preferred paw feel versus the leading clumping litter. And Tidy Care Alert, with color-changing crystals that help monitor the health of your cat. Designed with cats' needs in mind without sacrificing the performance you expect. New Tidy Care from Tidy Cats. Learn more at tidycats.com.
This episode is brought to you by Tinder. Cuffing season is in full effect, which makes Tinder the place to be right now. There's a new wave of folks coming back to the app ready to find love, fun, or just a new friend. And if you're worried about never meeting up with your matches IRL, don't be. 1.5 million Tinder users go on dates in person every week. Explore all of the possibilities for yourself. Tinder. It starts with a swipe. Download Tinder today.
What sequel has left you so disappointed? So not the worst sequel, but maybe something you built up in your head and you thought, this is going to be great. And then you came out and you're like, oh.
Well, it kind of connects with what you asked about the worst sequel was. And
beautiful.
And the reason I went at it, because there are so many terrible sequels, and because it's an industry that sort of thrives on copycats and repeat play, and if that worked, do it again. It's a litany of awful sequels. The Terminators that came on, diminishing returns of those, the Alien sequels. They're just, I think there are interesting things about Alien 3, but Alien Resurrection and all the ones that sort of you think, oh God. But for me, the greatest, I think, descent from height to kind of awfulness on a level that I cared about was Speed 2.
Yeah.
Because Speed was so good. It's one of those fantastic, pure action movies. I'm sure Cameron loved it. He must have loved it. It built on this kind of beautiful, poetic high concept of a bus. It has a bomb on board. If it goes above 50 miles an hour, the bomb switches on. If it goes back below 50 miles an hour, the bomb goes off. And it's heading for rush hour traffic in LA. So it's just perfect. It's a setup because your brain goes, oh shit, what's going to happen? How are they going to solve it? And what's brilliant about Speed is, how it sustains that one idea and sort of extrapolates what can be done from it. It's a brilliant screenplay, really amazing screenplay about, you take a movie-like concept and you kind of create a movie around it. Who's the killer? Why is he doing that? Who's the hero? What kind of guy is he? And he has to be gung-ho and he has to be mad. And then they put Keanu Reeves in it for some reason, and it works perfectly. Because Keanu Reeves has this kind of, rather kind of amusing and sweet recklessness about him. He doesn't quite get things. That makes him perfect for the situation because he's too ballsy to care. And Sandra Bullock, is the girl on the bus who ends up driving the bus. It's like a perfect sort of measured thriller in a way, that each beat of the film expands the idea and takes you further. And the screenplay, Graham Yost is the guy who wrote it, and this had been a sequel. This would have been maybe my answer to the first question, but it's a first film. And he's thought about how you get the bus driver off, what happens. He's thought about problems on the bus. So there's a criminal already on the bus, a guy with a gun. Then he's thought about all the problems you have to pose the bus. You have to get it off the freeway because the freeway is jam-packed. How do you do that? Then they had this idea of, the earthquake had been recently, and so the freeways weren't finished. So they got empty freeways. They got an empty freeway. Just all these things, they kind of kept exacerbating and escalating the idea. So James Cameron concept, films need to escalate. That's how they move along. So the audience can't be let to settle. You've got to kind of keep getting more scared rather than kind of like pause and go back in, pause. You escalate your action movie tenor. And Speed does that perfectly. So let me tell you, in the middle of the 90s, we were in the market for a Speed sequel. In fact, we were all writing them ourselves in our heads. Everyone was going, Speed on there, Speed on a plane, Speed, how are you going to do it again? Speed on that. I conceived of an idea myself and watched a series of bombs we placed in shopping malls across LA. And it was all about how you got from one shopping mall to the next. It was the same Keanu Reeves character. This is my pitch. Never got to pitch it to 20th Century Fox, sadly. But and the speed was how fast you got to move across LA to stop the next bomb. And I hadn't really thought it all through. Surely we'd just get in a chopper, but and go to the next one. But there were going to be various complicated reasons about why the bombs were there and how speed was about how you got to do it, which is a bit Die Hard with a vengeance when you think about it. That's kind of that idea.
Yeah.
But everyone in their heads, we're going to do Speed, and then the rumors started to circulate. Again, it's when hype was up and running, and I was obviously a film journalist by this time. I was on Empire, so we were very keyed in to what Speed 2 might be. And obviously Fox wanted to get one going as soon as possible. And they started talking about a boat. And we were kind of like, there were kind of jokes going around in the Empire office, but how fast does a boat go? You're on we're presuming it wasn't the speedboat because that wouldn't make much of a movie.
Yeah.
It's going to be an ocean liner.
A notoriously slow thing.
A notoriously slow thing. The film's called Speed. That's a basic idea. Yeah. So you're going, it's not. You can do Die Hard on an ocean liner when it's it's like a small building floating at sea. And that's kind of idea works. I mean, Under Siege is basically that movie, where it's you just contain the drama on the boat rather than making the boat the thing. But if you're making a Speed, the vehicle has to be on the move. So that kind of perplexed us. Then these rumors started to circulate that Keanu Reeves wasn't happy with what they were doing, what the script was, maybe he just didn't like the boat and the concept.
I wonder why.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I had professional interest in this because obviously we were planning Empire covers at the time. You plot your Empire covers sort of a year ahead, and you start to negotiate with the studio, and you kind of hone in on your timing. And obviously, we'd all loved Speed, and it'd been a big selling magazine for Empire. We had Keanu on the cover. So we were invested in Speed 2, maybe a bit blindly. And you get caught up. We hadn't seen it. We hadn't read any scripts. And we were a bit skeptical about ocean liners, but we're going, okay, these guys are professionals. They're going to do something. But once Keanu dropped out, we were a bit like, what do we do? Do we back out? But we stuck with it. We stuck with the Sandra equation. We're going to put Sandra on our cover with a boat or whatever it was. It was at the time still one of the biggest films of that summer. There have been various trailers which have been a bit odd, But there's Willem Dafoe, and there was some action, and we were just kind of going, okay, we'll see what happens. But I think in our hearts, certainly in my heart, there was this sense that you can't do this without Keanu Reeves. You can't do a Terminator film without Arnie, and you can't do a Speed movie without Keanu, because they were sort of intricately tied together.
Yeah.
And they were going to do that. And I think Fox must have known. I think it was ironically enough, a runaway train of a film, but sadly not a runaway train of a plot.
That would be a much better concept.
They couldn't do that. Was it Under Siege 2?
Under Siege 2, that's a train, yeah.
Yeah, see? That's the problem. This feels more like an Under Siege movie than it does a Speed film. But
It does. But anyway, we were caught up, like Fox, we were caught up in this runaway train of an event, and we'd invested in shooting Sandra and all these things. It was all quite exciting still. And then word came back to us that Sandra wouldn't be shot on her own. She had to be shot with Jason Patric, the replacement to Keanu Reeves. And, best will in the world. Jason Patric, at that point, and at no other point in his career has ever been a big star. Maybe for about 5 minutes after The Lost Boys, but he's done some great performances, Jason Patric, but he's not really got that wow factor of a movie star. And maybe at that point we should have smelled a rat. But we were still committed to this Speed 2 debacle. We were kind of headed to the dock when the ship can't stop. That was us. That was 20th Century Fox. This was this whole damn film. And then, and this will kind of relate to the story to come, but I was kind of working on the third Danny Boyle film with him, and Andrew McDonald, who's his producer at the time, had told me he'd read the Speed 2 screenplay and had heard it's diabolical, the film, and the whole of the studio was caught up in this, how do we rescue this disaster? And I'm like, thanks for telling me that. I've got a cover coming out in a matter of months. And we can't get out of it now because there are publicists involved and Sandra's involved and Jason's involved. So, we kind of knew, I think Fox kind of knew, everybody kind of knew, I think the whole of the world kind of knew this was going to be an awful film. We were just waiting for it to happen. I can't even, it's interesting you said, what's your worst sequel? I can't even remember a lot of what happens in it. I remember there's a scene where Jason Patric is introduced on a motorbike as being a bit reckless and Keanu-like. Yeah. He sort of takes his helmet off, and you all kind of go, oh, it's Jason Patric, it's not Keanu. And there's some throwaway line about her old boyfriend being into,
he was too dangerous, he was too crazy, that's why they broke up. And Jason Patric, she worked on the beach as like beach police until the crash at the beginning.
Yeah. So I watched this film at the cinema.
Wow.
So I was 16 and I saw this film in the cinema, and I remember absolutely hating it. And then I watched it, I hadn't watched it again until yesterday. So thanks for that. And I watched it again yesterday. I went, oh yeah, I remember exactly why I hated this movie so much. It's basically a 2-hour long episode of Baywatch. It's terrible. It belongs on an early 90s TV show, not a Hollywood movie. It's awful.
It sort of breaks its own rules, doesn't it? Because the beauty of Speed is you take the kernel of the idea and you extrapolate outwards. Here you've got an idea, you've got to kind of move back inwards. It's a bomb on a boat with, for some reason, Sandra Bullock's on the boat with her new cop boyfriend. And you've got your as a director and a screenwriter, you're trying to figure out how to make that exciting, how to create this kind of runaway train sort of structure, how to create the idea that this thing is unstoppable. What are we going to do? And of course, it just doesn't. Everyone can just get off the boat. It's just got this kind of. Willem Dafoe, I think, gives it a go, doesn't he? He's the kind of disgruntled employee.
Willem Dafoe's almost a little too Willem Dafoe, I think. He's like turned up to 11.
Yeah.
I think the reason for that is that he just realises what bad movie he's in. He's like, right, I'm just going to have to give it everything.
There's nothing else for it. I'm just going to have to ham this
up.
He
wanted to go big, yeah. I think he was like, I've read the IMDb and the Wikipedia pages this morning so they won't lie at all. But he wanted to do a big movie. I think he just wanted to put a big hammy performance in. But this whole film reminds me of, I think it's a sequence in one of the Austin Powers when he's on a slow moving steamroller. Yes. Someone won't move out the way for ages and like, get out the way.
And it's interesting, going back to Cameron and what makes Cameron so skillful is that all chase sequences are kind of dilations in time. You kind of bring things close together and you pull them apart. To extend a chase, you've got to kind of break the rules of physics a little bit in time. And as filmmakers, you have to disguise that. You don't let the audience in on the way you're cheating with things. And Halloween, I was watching yesterday, is a brilliant use of that idea. That basically Michael Myers moves in ways that aren't normal. And that's the rules of Halloween. So he can go from from a landing to the bottom of the stairs in a second. And that's just what we accept as being a logic of Halloween. He dilates time. You can't ever catch up with him. And he can always catch up with you because he doesn't obey the laws of time. And a lot of chase sequences do that. And Cameron is an absolute master of, to sustain the kind of tension of a chase, you've got to keep them apart rather than bring them together. You've got to kind of do that. It's kind of dance routine almost. And if you look at the brilliant scene we were talking about earlier from Terminator 2, that what is so great about that truck chase is it's kind of like almost a pinball. They kind of come close and they hit each other and go back out again. And then they get them to swap vehicles. Everyone keeps having to change vehicles. And what this does is sustain the chase. It kind of creates a narrative within the chase. It's absolutely superb screenwriting about do that. There's nothing, the whole of Speed is that, which is sustaining the chase. And how do you do it? And it stretches credibility, but I think it's kind of winking a little bit at us. But Speed 2 is so slow and lumbering. So actually what you've got to do is bring things, you've got to speed it up. You've got to kind of try and do it the opposite.
At one point, they're like, oh my God, we're going to crash in 6 hours. What can we do? It's like, I'm sure we can figure something out in that time. And they said they can't get off the boats, but then William Dafoe gets off the boat on a speedboat.
Yeah, it's very hard. Imperatives are very hard, I think, when you're a screenwriter. And you've really got to be, it's good writing. It separates sort of bad writing about how you create imperatives. Have you seen the new Bond film?
Yes, loved it. Rich, have you seen it yet?
Yeah, we've all seen it. Okay, so we won't say, but not to give too much away, but there's an end sequence where Bond goes back to finish a job. And I thought it wasn't the greatest piece of writing because the imperative that takes him out of the boat back into the base to complete the job actually doesn't exist. There's no bomb about to go off. His loved ones are safe.
Yeah.
There's missiles incoming, but the situation wasn't imperative. It was kind of vaguely, he could go away and regroup and come back again. And the situation wouldn't change.
Yeah,
I'm a dreadful logician when it comes to watching films, and I start going, well, why is he doing that? I know emotionally why it needs to happen and dramatically, but great screenwriting creates imperatives that you realise there's no other way this story can evolve. It's got one route to go down.
Yeah,
it's inescapable doom and all those kind of things are sewn in, and that's great, writing rather than great, drama or all that kind of great filmmaking. Just great writing creates imperatives. And I think the brilliance of Cameron is his films are unpredictable, but they're like gravity. They're going to happen that way no matter what. They're this kind of force within them that, and that's what creates tension. You think about Aliens again. The imperatives in Aliens are like the movie. They have got to live. They've got to survive. There are no other choices. And things just keep getting worse. As Bill Paxton keeps telling us that along the way, this thing's just getting worse. And it's brilliant. I mean, he has he's an artist of the imperative, James Cameron. From the moment that the Marines go into the nest and things,
I love that scene. It scares the shit out of me.
Incredible sequence. All the moving parts of that sequence, the screens with the flat lining on the kind of the armored personnel carrier, cutting between that, and then it's the scene, a really important scene dramatically as well. It's the point Ripley takes charge. It's the point where she has to step up, and that's always a Ripley thing because she can see the imperative before anyone else can. That's what makes her Ripley, and it's just a fabulous moment where Gorman is cracking up and all the Marines are dying, and she takes charge and sort of controls the kind of armed person, crashes it into the nest, and all those wonderful Cameron dialogue. We are leaving, and all that stuff. Michael Biehn, and they're going. That's what brilliant writing does for you, because you don't doubt a second of it, no matter how far fetched the scenario.
Yeah,
drive of it is great, and you come back to Speed 2. There's just not any imperatives in it. There's nothing that the engine of the film is completely missing.
There's no jeopardy whatsoever.
No one wanted to make it, apart from the studio. The director didn't even want to make it, apparently, Jean de Bont. And he was contracted, and he was like, well, I had a dream once about a boat crashing into something. Let's do that.
Do you think...
I just want to know why they put UB40 in it, to be honest.
Oh, I hate UB40 so much as well. That really adds to the hatred.
The best will in the world. They're hardly the most propulsive band, are they? They're kind of reggae based. It's all quite laid back. Yeah. You want a bit of heavy metal or something to kind of drive this thing forward. It's a very strange. You imagine the amount of screenwriters and the amount of money around that project they could have brought in. Yeah, they could have done a bake-off in Hollywood and everyone come in with their Speed 2 pitch.
Because everyone had one.
Surely, we all had one. I had one. We all had one.
Yeah,
We'd all gone in and gone to folks. Imagine this.
I have to know how the press screening went when you guys watched it at Empire.
Well, we didn't go to Monty. We saw it early. It was at that time when the American releases and UK releases were still kind of staggered.
Yeah.
We knew our fate, I think. It was already that, we were committed to the cover. And I think it opened in America as our cover hit the newsstands and, nosedived in both cases. And I think we saw it shortly before that. So we'd kind of committed, and I think it maybe even gone to print with the issue. So there was no U-turn on that. That was an imperative and we couldn't escape it. And, oh God, yes, we saw the film. But we knew, one of the things, we were well aware the film was a problem. How bad, we didn't know. And I think it was about 5 of us who went in to see it at Fox. And I think even Fox was saying, lower your expectations. PR's quietly going, sorry, this hasn't really worked out. But, Sandra's on the cover. She's lovely. Everybody loves Sandra. Everyone put a good spin on it.
Totally wasted in this movie because she basically does nothing.
Yes. She's bored. Everybody's bored. It's just a film that's sort of...
Do you remember the star rating you gave it at Empire at the time? Was it?
Now you're sort of dredging up, the nightmare star ratings, the controversies of star ratings. Oh, God.
You think, it's got a cover, so I've got to go above 2 at least.
You are kind of right. We are not, with Empire, there was always this rule that you try and be positive as much as you can, and it's what drives Empire forward. You get people into the cinema, you don't get them out of it.
No one plans to make a bad film.
Exactly. So we are open-minded. Every day is Christmas Eve until we see the film, before you open our presents. But obviously, you're faced with bad films that you've kind of invested in, and it's really difficult because if you put 2 stars, you laugh at yourself in a way. You're saying, we don't know what we're doing. We put this on our cover. Now look at it. It's terrible. And they blame the messenger. It's an awful thing. If I can leap forward to Phantom Menace. We put 3 years of work into the Phantom Menace. Negotiation, investment, everything. And it paid off. The cover sales were great. Yeah. But the one element we could never control was the film itself. The one thing we didn't have any influence on was George Lucas. And I don't know if you remember the time, but it was Harry Knowles, and someone had seen a trade screening, and the word started to break. And we had a guy in America who saw it first. And I remember calling him, got him out of bed, 7:00 in the morning or something. We were all in the office going, well, what? And he kind of went, I knew in that, Phantom Menace was as bad as we thought. But then you're just confronted with this situation where you have committed this so much, magazine real estate to one film, Return of Star Wars, and the film is a dud. And what do you do? And maybe if we'd given it 2 stars, it may, honestly, it is a 2-star film. You're just, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. But you're mildly less damned if you kind of go with 4 stars. And trick your way around it. And what we did was we just found someone who could write a review without being one of the Star Wars zealots who could work a way around it and come up with an answer. It's star ratings are so hard. They're a very blunt tool.
I bet.
And I'm sure you could throw a list in front of me now and go, what the hell? And you'd be kind of right.
We're the same.
Batman and Robin, I've got a litany that lie behind me that people still remember. People, after I gave Superman Returns, which is a film I quite like, but the Bryan Singer, I know, he's been cast out of Hollywood and he's a terrible man. But at the time, I quite like Superman Returns. It's got a kind of nice melancholy about it. I gave it 5. I think we were seeing it very late, very close to press. It ain't a 5 star. People were calling me up in the office going, what the hell are you thinking? I was getting shouted at by the readers. I used to call at that point.
Amazing. Sorry.
The names I was called, I
can't imagine doing that. It's just phoning up a magazine and going, you're wrong.
It's so upset people. And you kind of have to, you talk them down. You're going, I get it and I understand. And I'm giving you my opinion. I'm not giving you yours. I'm not telling you to think the same as me.
Yeah, you make up your own mind.
Yeah, it's fine. And And in the end, they usually come back and you have a chat about something else, and then they love you at the end of the conversation. But they always start by shrieking at you. And I in a sense, I didn't mind, because it showed they cared, they were passionate, and they had a relationship with the magazine.
Yeah.
It's like your older brother had told you a film was good and you hated it, and they'd come to have a shout at you, and I kind of got that, and that was fine.
Is there a sequel that you went into and you thought this is going to be rubbish, but you came out quite liking or really liking?
That is a good question. What sequel
were you surprised about?
How good it was going to be? Oh God, no, I can't come up with a good answer.
I like these little questions.
I'm going to think to it now, and they'll probably come up. Can I come back to you on that?
Yeah.
I'm going to let me settle in my brain. I'm sure there is. I know there are ones that.
I could talk a little bit about Speed 2 and a bit more that I hate about it.
Okay.
You get it off your chest.
There's there's definitely something there. There's a death knell for me for any movie, which is the point where I look at my watch and go, how long is left of this? And it's for Speed 2, that happens about 45 minutes in. And I looked at it and I was like, how is this 2 hours? This film's nearly done. Like, we know the baddie is. We know what he's trying to do. We know how to get out of it. And how is there an hour and 15 minutes left? Oh. What are they going to do? And that was awful. But the worst bit, I think, for me, is that there is a point where the boat crashes into the kind of town.
Yes,
and
the jetty, isn't it?
In order to make it slightly more dramatic, they massively speed up the film, so everyone runs in like fast forward.
Yeah.
It's people running away with this boat in like comedy Benny Hill fast forward running. And it's
the same guy, isn't it? Is it Chris Plummer? I can't remember the name of the actor. It's the same guy whose car Keanu takes over and smashes the door off in the first one. It's the same actor going, why me again?
Pointless casting again. Like, no one really cared about his character in the first one, but then they brought him back in the second one.
All I thought was that I hope the dog's okay, and then the dog's head pokes out of the car, and you're like, oh, of course the dog's okay.
The dog's fine.
Well,
don't mess with the dog.
The problem they had is when they're talking about knots of like speed, and they're going, oh, we're at 9 now. It just doesn't sound very fast, does it? Oh,
who knows what 9 knots is? You know, like, who cares?
I know.
You've got Brian McCarthy's head doing this, or like little shots of him throwing his hair around.
There's no relativity, is there? Because with a bus, you compare it to the things around the bus.
Yeah, moving.
Cars and people on the streets. It's got a kind of reference point.
And the music works as well.
Boats are out at sea. There's no comparison. It's just they all look slow, don't they? From a wide shot.
It kind of feels like two things. It feels like a film that they were looking around for a script and they're like, oh, let's just use this one. It's called Cruise Control and stick speed on the front. Or it does feel like a Die Hard film, like you said, or an Under Siege film.
Yeah.
Both do it better.
Feels like an episode of Baywatch.
It does.
That was my overriding feeling.
Yeah. I suppose the Die Hard setup, isn't it? It's about confined space. So what you have to do is you have to set an action movie somewhere that's confined. You limit how far it can go. And it went from, it's gradually got bigger and bigger, didn't it? But it started with the tower bomb and then got to an airport. And Die Hard 3, it's New York. Probably slightly too big by Die Hard 3. And then after that, who cares? But there's a lot of terrible sequels down that road. But that's the kind of concept, isn't it? And Under Siege took that and just gave it a kind of military Steven Seagal kind of twist.
He actually works in that film.
Yeah. He's quite funny in that film, isn't he? He's so ridiculous. But yeah, I think there's but with the kind of speed, the kind of idea is that it's less about the confined space than the movement. It's the momentum. It's the thing within the context of the city that works.
It's what the whole plot relies on. It's called speed.
Yes.
And like you said, when you talk about the plot of the first Speed, you can explain it in like a sentence. Like there's a bomb on a bus and it can't go under 50 miles an hour. You're like, oh, that's genius. And then when you get to the second one, you're like, explain the plot to Speed 2. There's a man who puts leeches on his body, and he used to design these boats, but now they sacked him because he was getting sick. And he's put some bombs on to get the diamonds. I think that's what he was doing.
I don't even know.
And then instead of just sinking the boat, he wants to ram the boat into the town. But then he sees an oil liner at one point and changes it to that. But then it misses that. And then he gets off. Exactly. The plot's just diabolical. The whole thing's diabolical.
You can always hear the kind of committee meeting, can't you? With the kind of the executive at Fox walking around pointing at people. What have you got? Diamonds. Diamonds. Okay, throw in diamonds.
Yeah.
Wait, what have you got?
Leeches.
I love it. Leeches. Add it to the blast.
You be naughty.
Okay.
Oh man, it's so bad. Talking about surprising sequels, if you thought about that, I think Die Hard 3 is a good answer to that. Would you have agreed to that?
Yeah. I have slight problems with the ending, which I know was reshot. There was a different ending involving a building blowing up, but the Unabomber had been at work in America, so they thought it wasn't good to have a building blowing up as a kind of finale. It was kind of bad politics.
Oh, really?
So they had that rather strange scene with the helicopters and getting tangled up in the electric wires.
Oh, yeah. I remember.
It doesn't escalate as well as the previous ones had done. It isn't quite as beautifully formed. I like Die Hard 2. I know it's not as good as Die Hard, but I like it. I like the way it keeps all these different moving things in motion. The planes circling that can't land, the terrorists at some point, him stuck in the airport. And it's at that point where Willis was so good at being the wrong guy, being the anti-action hero. He bled. Arnie never bled. And that was kind of the joy of John McClane, is he looked beaten up, but he had this kind of thing about him that won the day.
Yeah, he's great in that role.
He was a cop from the 1950s thrown into the 1990s. He was in the wrong era, and that kind of made it work. And he really kind of maintained that character. And that works beautifully with, as you say, in Die Hard 3, with the relationship with Samuel Jackson. And they're both kind of guys from the wrong era, suddenly caught up in this kind of mad thing. They have to drive around and solve problems. And it kind of does work. I think the problem is that as soon as you make it a city, you are losing that nice thing about being sort of confined and trapped.
Yeah.
And Die Hard 4 really, I thought, should have gone back the other way and taken it back into a building on some level.
They went even bigger. They went states.
And by is it number 5 or 6? I can't remember.
Oh, they've gone to
They're
Chernobyl.
in Russia. Yeah. It's like, what? This is such an American story. Why are you in Russia? And it's just lost control of itself, which Speed franchise did with number 2.
Yeah.
It's Cameron understands there are things you have to have, and there are things you can play with and expand and change. But if you lose the things you have to have, then it falls apart. It's a very funny story about after Alien 3 came out and being this big disappointment. And David Fincher was a crushed man, been through his hell, of a journey. And Sigourney Weaver took him and Cameron out to dinner to try and cheer David Fincher up. Not very helpfully, one would assume, to take Cameron with them. But the three of them met for dinner. And they kind of sit down. And the first thing Cameron just shouts at him is, "You killed Newt!" He just shouts at Fincher's, he's already kind of just been beaten up by Hollywood. And here he's got Cameron in his face. But he's right, Cameron. Because Cameron can see that if you're going to do Alien 3, then Newt is necessary. Newt is the thing that the second film has built up that's become necessary to carry on. Otherwise, everything that went on in number 2 has been completely devalued. The fact that Ripley goes back and saves the child, the whole surrogate mother element, the whole focus on Newt is her own future. What saves herself is rescuing Newt. All of that is just dissolved as soon as you kill Newt in the opening, in the credits of Alien 3. It's all very miserabilist and impressive, an art movie, but as a sequel, it just destroys it. And I think it's why people
they work so hard to keep Newt and Hicks was it Hicks? I can't remember.
Yes,
alive.
It's Hicks.
At the end of Aliens, you think, I can't wait to see where they take these. And then they don't even give them a proper death, like an honorary death. They're just like, oh, they died in that pod. That was it. Kind of off camera.
There's all sorts of issues about the rights to use Michael Bihn's face and all that came into it. And Alien 3 is a very strange film. Not an uninteresting film, but a very strange film. And as a sequel, it's very bad because it doesn't give you the same feeling. It completely divorces itself. I have kind of theory that in some ways Alien 3 is a sequel to Alien than an Alien sequel, because it sort of carries on the mood and feel of Aliens but slightly extrapolates it. So it sort of enlarges the kind of setting but brings a similar feel to the original Alien. It's much more of a haunted house film. It's much more of a gothic film than Aliens is. And so it's kind of, I think if you think about Alien 3 almost as a direct sequel to Alien, it kind of makes a bit more sense.
Yeah.
It kind of fits into place.
I think a lot more people are coming around to Alien 3, especially the director's cut, isn't it? In more.
Yeah, it's called the assembly cut because obviously Fincher won't even look at it. He won't even talk about it.
Has he spoken to you about it, or?
No, I've never interviewed Fincher. I'm quite good friends with Charles De La Zarita, I should get his name right. He's the guy who put together all the extras for the anthology editions.
Yeah, that's great.
And made all the documentaries. And he edited the assembly cut and sort of put the new stuff back in and did what he could with it, based on the original screenplay notes and things that he had. So it gets you to as near as he can to what Fincher's vision might have been. But he said he left a message with Fincher. He was given the number because he wanted his approval. He wanted at least to say, I've done this. Do you want to look at it? I've not done this out of hand. And he got a call back, and he a message left from his answer phone. And he says it's just the voice going, "Oh shit!" The phone just goes down. He said that was it. And he's met Fincher subsequently, and he's worked with him a bit. But he's just like, that's all. He just couldn't. He couldn't bring himself even to look at it and
he had such
go
a bad
near
time.
it. I think he needs to now come to terms with it. It's been so long.
Yeah.
And go back and see the value that's in it. For him as a director, set up his style. I mean, it's all there. And you look at 7, it looks like Alien 3.
Yeah.
The same aesthetic as it were.
This episode is brought to you by the Polestar 3. Designing an SUV for the electric age means redesigning what an SUV can be. Introducing the Polestar 3, designed to go farther with up to 300 miles of range. Designed to entertain with its 25-speaker Bowers and Wilkins audio system, designed to look and sound like nothing else on the road. Polestar 3, the SUV for the electric age. To learn more and design yours today, visit Polestar.com.
This episode is brought to you by Coca-Cola. Could your holiday use a bit more cheer? Want to bring more festivity to your family gatherings? Know someone in need of a bit more ahs? This season, adding some extra ho-ho-ho to any holiday gathering is as easy as adding ice-cold Coke to your cart. Coca-Cola. Real magic.
This episode is brought to you by Mitsubishi Motors. Confidence is key when it comes to choosing a new car. That's why Mitsubishi Motors is introducing its Confidence Integrated Care Program that comes standard with every 2024 Mitsubishi model, which includes 2 years of limited maintenance, a 10-year, 100,000-mile powertrain limited warranty, and 5 years roadside assistance. Now that's confidence delivered. Only from Mitsubishi Motors. Certain restrictions apply. See MitsubishiMotorsConfidence.com for full program details.
What is your dream sequel?
Well, this segues very nicely, doesn't it? My dream sequel is a certain one. It's not a general one. It's a specific version of Alien 4. Now, Alien was a series I was very invested into. I love Ridley Scott's original, and obviously I loved the Cameron one, and I've been perplexed by Alien 3, but I was committed to this franchise. I was the guy covering it for Empire. I kind of staked out that territory for myself, as you do greedily when you're on a magazine.
Yeah.
So, I was kind of very invested into Alien Resurrection. I think at that point it was still called Alien 4. We didn't have a title. But through various means, partly through our relationship with Danny Boyle's camp, we got hold of the script. And at that point, Danny Boyle was being interviewed for it and tempted with it. And he was given the screenplay, obviously. And it was Joss Whedon, who wrote the Alien Resurrection. And the first draft it's big. But a lot of the things are there, but it's fantastic. It's completely different. The third act is completely different. So it builds up the same way. It's 200 years later, and Ripley's brought back as a clone, and there are these pirates who can ship bodies in, and scientists are experimenting on aliens. It has all that. Relatively same. It was much more elaborate. It was too long, the screenplay. You knew it was going to have to come in. But by the third act, Joss Whedon is just going for it. He's doing camera. He's escalating. So instead of that weird stuff that happens at the end of Alien Resurrection, kind of half alien, half human, I don't know whatever the hell was going on again with Alien Resurrection. No one really knows. There's a far different ending in the original screenplay. There are aliens who are white, because they've been genetically changed. There are aliens who can move much faster. They can scale walls in sort of an instant. He had masses of them breaking out of this science thing. He had ones that could fly, who were starting to develop wings. It was a whole idea about genetic mutation. affecting the aliens. And it was just, I mean, they're in Danny Boyle's notes. How the hell are we going to do this? Because CGI really at that stage wasn't, it was starting to be used, but wasn't at a stage where it could be used as director this. Whedon had just let his imagination go and said, I'm going to do aliens again. I'm going to just keep them coming, but I'm going to do variations on a thing. I'm going to change the aliens. And Ripley's at the heart of it, fighting these things off. And it's, again, it's a survival story. The general structure is the same as Alien Resurrection. The band of pirates have to kind of make their way through the space station. But it was so much bigger. There wasn't just one or two aliens following them about. They were everywhere, and they were coming up through the vents. And they were coming out of the walls. And they were kind of very bizarre. I mean, it would have been quite a bizarre alien film still, I think. The flying ones is kind of a weird thing. And we just kind of got very excited, as you would. We thought, well, this needs a bit of taming and whatever, costs will come into effect. But this sounds exciting. And the idea that Danny Boyle, he at this point made Shallow Grave, and he'd made Trainspotting, and had that kind of vibrancy about his filmmaking, almost like Scorsese-like, in the way he kind of moved his camera, and he moved between the way he edited his films, the kind of visual play of things. You look at Trainspotting and you look at Shallow Grave, it's a bit slower. You can see an alien movie from those films in terms of style, the way he executes them. His films are very fast and full of kind of emotional energy, which is kind of what James Cameron has. I know they're very different filmmakers, make very different choices, but they have that same kind of emotional energy. That, as I said, imperatives, desperation, those kind of are the forces at work, which is what you need for an alien movie. You actually watch the first two films; they're very emotional films. There are people absolutely at their wits' end, height of crisis, and it's about emotion, dealing with that. Think about Hudson. Who just loses it in Aliens, and you think about Ripley's great gift is to contain her emotions and to think through them, to keep a calm head while all else is going kind of haywire. And there's that great joke, isn't there, about having sort of artificial humans in the middle of these dramas, in the middle of these action movies, who have no emotions. And they're kind of compare them to the humans. It's kind of great kind of idea at work. So Ash and Bishop, are very important constituents. And yes, you learn that the Winona Ryder character, Call, is an artificial, but she's moved on. Whedon was doing things with her as a female one, playing on our own perceptions of artificial life. Really good ideas were at work. It's that real lesson, I think, when you read a screenplay, a first draft or a second draft of a screenplay, you realize the writer is often not to blame. The writer has known all the things that you know and want, and they've tried to put them down. It's then got to go through the kind of the rinse cycle of the studio. Budget constraints, producers, stars have their demands. Ripley Weaver would have come in and said, well, I don't want to be doing that. I want to do less. I don't want guns. She was obsessed with not firing guns in the films. All the kind of things that take you away from what the core prospect of the film is. And of course, writers have no power. They're at the bottom of the food chain. So Whedon, at that point, didn't have any influence. So he would see his screenplay get whittled down, and Genet would come in, and he's got a rather wacky sense of humor, which works very well in his French films. But it didn't really fit the tone of voice I think that the Alien films needed. They needed to be quite earnest, and you sort of insert the humor on top of that. Which Cameron does very well. You can put Hudson in there to be the kind of pressure valve to give the audience a chance to go, whew, and then we gather again. But you can't play these things as comic. You can't, and that seems to be the tone of voice that Alien Resurrection has. That it doesn't take itself seriously, and that isn't there in the first screenplay. That was kind of lost. So if you say what would be my dream sequel, is to kind of rewind time and convince Danny Boyle, who maybe rightly thought this isn't going to work, and get him to direct Alien 4 as it was then. It might have been called Alien Resurrection, I don't know, as it was, with what $200 million thrown at it, which would never have been given to it. So we'd have thousands of aliens and all sorts of rampant chaos, with Danny Boyle's kind of fantastic, vivid camera work and understanding of character. I think he would have done great things with Weaver. It's a kind of amoral, uncertain character that we don't know whether we can trust or not. They never quite get a hold of that. I think she's really good in Alien Resurrection, and I think she was much better than the film. But I think the ambiguity around her kind of ebbs away, and she becomes more standard Ripley as it goes on. Whereas you think Danny Boyle might have kind of explored that, whose side is she really on? Question
That's
mark.
a great idea. Yeah. I love the idea of rewinding time and going back and doing Alien 4, mainly because I think we could avoid Alien versus Predator and Alien versus Predator 2 if we could do that.
They're not good.
Oh God, Requiem. That's a terrible film.
It's so bad.
Yeah, that's been someone's worst.
That has been someone's worst. Yeah.
I can see that, because Alien versus Predator, it's a bad film, but it's a kind of B movie kind of energy to it that you can get through it.
It's mercifully short, I think, is the positive.
Yes. Alien versus Predator Requiem. I remember, like you were saying, looking at your watch, going, "How much more?"
It's dog shit.
So,
yeah, and you can't see anything either. It's just black. You're just watching a black screen most of the time.
That's a real bête noire of mine, no pun intended, is action scenes at night. And they're on the increase.
Yeah,
they allow directors to cheat. Basically, they're really hard to do. An action scene daytime is really hard because you've got to show where everything is, and geography of scenes becomes all important. At night, you can just edit however you want, and you have no idea where things are. You're kind of left, right, and centre. Where are they? Who are they? Where are the bad guys? It's just stuff happening.
Absolutely.
Sensation over logic, and it really drives me mad.
I would love to watch an action movie that just happens at midday.
That would be great.
Well, Speed, isn't it?
Yeah.
Speed is all daytime.
Yeah,
they don't even though I know they go on the underground at the end, but it's all daytime.
Yeah.
That film.
Sorry to go back to Alien Resurrection. Do you know how close Danny Boyle got to do it? Did he sign papers? Did he go into pre-production?
No, I think he was obviously, he got the script and he was negotiating with them. At the same time, I think John Hodge had written A Life Less Ordinary, and that was kind of happening, and that was with Fox as well. So this was kind of the relationship. He had a relationship with the studio, and I think his point of view was it was too big. He felt at the time he thought he was going to lose control. When there was Geiler and Hill were still in charge, the two producers who produced them all, and Danny's kind of great, but I think he needs to be left alone. When you have Cameron demands to be left alone and sort of fights his corner because he likes battles, and Ridley's a bit like that as well. He's ready for the scrum, and I'm not sure Danny would have been as much as those two. And Fincher wasn't. He was beaten up by the whole situation.
Yeah,
it's a bit of a sink or swim, and he thought, I don't want to go down that road. I don't want to get caught up. And this would have been 2 years of his life given up to it.
Do you think that Danny Boyle now would do a decent job?
I think he would. He wouldn't do it because he had such a horrible time on Sunshine with the special effects, and he hated doing special effects so much because they were so slow. Yeah. That I don't think he'll ever go back to a big special effects movie. I think he'll just he may do bits of stuff around the edges, but I don't think he'll head back in a hurry to science fiction.
I did read that this was offered to Peter Jackson. Did that ever come up in any of your conversations, or is that a complete?
He never mentioned Alien. He's funny. I mean, I've talked about him with Alien because he has, he's a great prop collector.
Yeah.
And we talked about, we had a nice chat once we weren't on, doing an interview. We were just talking about Alien. I'd done books on it at that point, and he was talking about it. He was sort of off the record about how much he hated Prometheus and all those things. And he went, well, I've got the derelict. And I said, why is it? I've got Giger's original model of the derelict. It's huge. It's the giant donut derelict. It's about 10 feet across. Wow. So he said, it's a warehouse down the road. And he said, go and have a look. So I kind of got to scamper down the road after we'd finished talking. And they opened up this box, and there's the derelict. It was a bit knackered.
I bet.
So he was really into Alien. And he says he was offered. He makes a joke that he was offered David Fincher's career at various stages. He's been offered all the kind of projects. Fight Club. He was offered Benjamin Button. I think it might have been 7 at one point. He got because he was circling around Hollywood at the similar time when Fincher began. Yeah. They were kind of at the same sort of times. So it's interesting. I must find out whether he got a chance to do Alien.
It does say in a Wikipedia post, so I'm not quite sure how true that is. And how? Because
the other one, I mean, I could have said, but the sequels were good, so maybe it didn't feel quite as pertinent. Was his version of Planet of the Apes? I mean, there's a whole. I mean, if you want to talk about dream sequels that I would love to see. There's a whole load of Planet of the Apes sequels I would kill for. Oliver Stone's Planet of the Apes. You can imagine what a political metaphor that would have been. James Cameron's Planet of the Apes with Arnie. Yeah, you can imagine how huge that would be.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then Peter Jackson's, of which there was a script that he wrote. At one point, that might have been the Cameron version. It was a lot of kind of, again, it's Fox doing various projects and all the kind of the stuff that goes on in a studio. But the Jackson version of Planet of the Apes is really interesting. His is a direct sequel to the original series. Oh, right. He wanted Roddy McDowall to come back, and he was going to have it's called the Renaissance of Planet of the Apes. It was going to be like the Renaissance era of mankind. They started painting and sculpting. You know, it was an artistic time amongst the apes. And he was going to have a giant orangutan as the Pope. And it's just, and there was the whole plot hinged, unsurprisingly, on a hybrid ape-human sort of, and this has been kept hidden. Roddy McDowall's Cornelius, or whatever character it was, they kept this kind of half man, half ape, evolution quiet, because the guerrillas, who were still the police force, were trying to hunt it down. And that was kind of the dynamic of the plot. And there was all these things about how the statues were all of apes. Yet if you knock them over, they would shatter and there'd be a human statue underneath. So he had the kind of Planet of the Apes ideas. And that sounded really interesting. Except he elected to go and make Lord of the Rings instead.
Thank God.
A whole other story. Thank God. And a different path. And then, of course, we got some very good Planet of the Apes sequels that came through Weta and Fox. So maybe we didn't lose out. But I would love to see those different versions of Planet of the Apes being made. Oliver Stone's, that would be like, it must be mad.
I'd love to see that. I'd love an Oliver Stone Planet of the Apes. I really like Planet of the Apes. There's just the whole. I've said before and been ridiculed already that I even like the Tim Burton one. Like,
yeah,
I'm the only person in the world, but
I know what you mean. What I do like, I love the masks, and I love the masks in the original film because they're kind of weird and unsettling. Because the relationship with the actor is so much kind of odder. So they're not quite monkeys, they're not quite humans. So they're almost kind of a bit perverse and odd. And that sort of carries on a bit in the Burton one. You know it's Tim Roth and it's Helena Bonham Carter, but you're kind of looking at a long face. Whereas the time you get to the CGI versions, and they're sort of beautifully done, and it's all motion capture and all those things, it's lost that weirdness that the makeup brought to it.
Yeah.
And I liked that kind of quality that they had. So yeah, I mean, Mark Wahlberg's a disaster in that Tim Burton film, but there are interesting things in it. The monkey stuff is good.
And those were Ian Nathan's Unequal Sequels. Brilliant.
Oh my God.
I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
Any chance to talk about Terminator 2, I'm down with that.
Yeah. I think that's a funny episode. We've edited it back. It's funny how little me and you don't talk in the first 20 minutes.
We didn't need to say anything.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Ian's knowledge is incredible. Like, literally, both of us are just redundant at this point, which is sort of how our perfect podcast works, right?
Yeah, definitely.
We do the intro and the outro, we just let the guest talk in the middle.
Oh, man. It's just... I don't know if you haven't read the Lord of the Rings book, have you? The new one?
I haven't, not yet, no.
I'm going to try and sell it now. It's called Anything You Can Imagine, Peter Jackson, The Making of Middle-earth. It is so good. Like, if Lord of the Rings just hit the 20th year anniversary, just gone. If you're a massive fan, get this book. It is so good. It makes you want to watch it. How it goes into is incredible, especially if you like all the extras that are on the original DVD and the Blu-rays. It's just...
Which I know that you very much love, don't you?
I'd watch all 9 hours continuously if I was allowed. But I don't. But yeah. And suddenly, someone finally picked Speed 2 as their worst sequel.
It's easily the worst sequel. Or one of the worst sequels, I would say. I'm not sure I'm going to call it the worst, but it's the worst premise. Yeah. Because I can't think about what was going through someone's mind when they went, it's called Speed. It's all about going fast. Let's put it on a cruise ship. Notoriously slow. Like, what?
You can't make cruise ships sexy and fun and fast, can you?
My wife's never seen it, and I was trying to explain to her, but she loves Speed.
Yeah.
I was trying to explain to her why Speed 2 is bad. I came to the point where nothing anybody does, none of the heroes have any bearing on the film whatsoever. Like, if they did nothing, if they slept through this movie, it would still pan out exactly the same. That's basically it. They could sleep through this movie and it would all still happen just exactly as it does.
Yeah, exactly.
It's pointless.
It's rubbish. I've got a list of sequels that I think are so bad. I'm not going to mention them because I don't want to put thoughts in people's heads, but Speed 2 was on that list, along with some others that we've done.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I would say it's definitely in the top 10 of the worst ever sequels.
I didn't know how bad it was until I rewatched it for this episode. And that's when I went, oh yeah, it is one of the worst sequels ever. Yeah.
It's definitely up there with Batman and Robin and Alien vs. Predator 2.
Yes. Oh yeah, definitely is. Yeah. It's definitely in that unholy trilogy.
Oh God. And also just his knowledge of the Danny Boyle near Alien Resurrection film.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we've also got some really good stuff in there about being the head of a magazine, I thought. Listening back and how you deal with having a Speed 2 on the cover of your magazine, but then trying to not be too harsh about Speed 2 when it comes to reviewing it. I thought that's really interesting.
It was really interesting, yeah.
And thank you to Ian for actually being truthful, because you could quite easily give us a politic answer to that and beat around the bush and be like, well, you know, and sometimes blah, 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 blah. But he was honest, and yeah, I found that.
It was great. Yeah,
he answered all my questions. Brilliant.
It was a brilliant podcast. It really, really was. I mean, it was, exactly what we want this podcast to be like.
Exactly.
So thank you, Ian, and thank you everyone for listening. If this is the first time you've listened, then we have got loads of back catalogue for you to go back on, pick it up on Spotify or Apple or wherever you get your podcasts from. And when you do that, if you like what you hear, give us a little review. But you can now give us a 5-star review on Spotify.
You can, yeah, that's new.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, so please do give us reviews when you listen. We would absolutely love it. It would be great. But also, more important than that, just tell your friends. Recommend it. If you've got friends who love movies, or if you've got friends who just love listening to people talk nonsense, just recommend this podcast to them. I'm sure they'd love it. It would brighten up their slightly grey and damp January.
Yeah, because at the start of a new year now.
Absolutely.
January's always tough.
Yeah, and if you want to know more about the podcast, then you can follow us on our social media channels. We've got we're at Unequal Sequel on Instagram and on Twitter, and we have an email address, unequalsequel@hotmail.com. Yeah, see? Never getting those wrong again now.
No.
They're all imprinted in my brain, and I'll get them right every time.
Yeah.
I'll get them wrong next week. You watch.
Hopefully. Fingers crossed. We've got a lot planned this year, so stick with us. It's going to be very exciting, 2022. Yeah, please give us a like and a listen. Tell your friends and all that jazz. And I've got nothing else to say, Rich. You got anything to say?
No,
okay,
that's
cool. It's a goodbye from me. Bye-bye. And a goodbye from him.
Bye.
Come on, January. We're going to fucking have you. See you later. Bye.